Great. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, good to see this many people come out on a Saturday. I don't know where to start. I'm going to start probably with early years, probably because some people want to know where it came from. I grew up in Philadelphia, born and raised in Frankfurt, small section, and it was interesting. It was an interesting time growing up there because one, it was a community that you could actually be out on the basketball court and have a novel in your back pocket, and it wasn't thought strange. And it was because largely the neighborhood was filled of people who had gone to college, who served in the war, that traveled the world. And so we were being raised by these people that had such an affection for life, and neighborhood and community. So it was great to grow up in a situation like that. It was also great for me to grow up in a household where both of my mother's brothers were artists. And so one went to the university, at that time it was called PCA, Pennsylvania College of Fine Art, Philadelphia College of Fine Art. And then my other brother, my sister's other brother, my uncle Bradley, went to Tyler. And so happened when I decided to go to college, I went to Tyler, and now I teach at Philadelphia College of Art, which is now the University of the Arts. So it's kind of full circle. And so growing up in my household, first 5 years I spent with my grandparents. To this day, I have no idea why, because my mother and father lived in the Northeast. It wasn't that far. But first 5 years, I stayed with them until I became school age. And that was a problem for me, because what happened, as a result of living those first 5 years with my grandparents, I had this attention. Your grandparents, and you're doted on, and you're the firstborn, and so you got your aunts and uncles, and everybody's just like, oh my God. And all of a sudden, my sister comes into this world, and it all ended, and so I wanted her to go back to wherever she came from. So by the time I got schooled age in the neighborhood, in the community in Philadelphia and Frankfurt, it was tough for me. It was tough because I needed the attention, didn't know how to get it, but also I had no idea, because they were not talking about dyslexia back then. And so I remember standing in front of a class, and there with book having to read aloud. They don't do that much anymore, but kids had to go up in front of the class and read aloud. And I would get up there, and my words would just flip back and forth, and I had no idea, and I figured I just didn't know the trick. I figured all the kids in my class figured the trick, and I didn't. And so what I would do, how kids will compensate, for shortcomings, what I would actually create a disturbance in the classroom just before I had to go up to get kicked out of the class. And so therefore I won. In the long run, I lost, but for that time, for that moment, to protect, as I tell the kids, you have to protect that little guy, that little girl, that little self, that little entity that you is so fragile. And so I was doing it, but at the cost of failing the third grade. And so when I'm telling kids this, when I'm out in this, speaking to the various schools, they're like, oh, E.B. Lewis failed the third grade? Whoa. And now what I've just done is I've just leveled the playing field. So now they're turned on. Because now this guy is not just a guy coming in talking about why they should be striving for excellence and avoiding mediocrity. He failed the third grade. And so now they want to know what happened. How did I move from that point? Well, by the time sixth grade came around, I was a mess. I was a total mess. My parents were taking me from one psychologist to the next, trying to figure me out. The school, I remember early on, third grade was an important time for me. Not only did I fail the third grade, but there was a citywide contest that we had to paint someone famous. And I painted Benjamin Franklin, and I won the contest. So it was an embarrassment for the school to put this little kid out who just failed the third grade but won the contest. So that was kind of my life. And so by the time sixth grade came around, I was a total mess. My parents didn't know what to do. My other brothers and sisters, doing fine, and this one just wouldn't do right. And so we had a sixth grade class, what was called Career Day. And we were excited. You know, here's people on the stage from our neighborhood, fireman, electrician, doctor, lawyer, and we were excited. It was filled, audience was filled. The sixth grade class filled the auditorium. Teachers were sitting around the sides of the auditorium, and in the back were people from the neighborhood also, probably some of the spouses and things, and the newspaper. And so little Charlie Shoemaker on the front row, it came to the point where we were able to answer questions, ask questions, and you know, they would answer. And so little Charlie Shoemaker raised his hand. He said he wanted to be a doctor. You know, the doctor on the stage said, "Oh, really? You like science?" He said, "I love science." So, "No, you know, math is important also." And he said, "Yeah, I love math too." And so all the audience, all of us sitting there, knew that little Charlie Shoemaker would probably be a doctor. So I'm sitting there thinking about, and I was next to the teacher, you know that kid. You know, I was next to the teacher, and I sitting there thinking about what can I say to get the same attention that Charlie's getting right now. And so I thought for a moment, and I raised my hand. And I said I wanted to be a lawyer. I didn't really want to be a lawyer. I only wanted to get the same attention that Charlie got. But instead, the whole sixth grade class, teachers included, laughed. They thought that was the most ridiculous thing they ever heard. Little Earl Lewis wanted to be a lawyer, let alone a lawyer. Oh my God, that's impossible. He failed at third grade. He was in the principal's office at least once a week. His parents were taking him from one psychologist to the next. No way in the world. So they laughed and they laughed, and I hear the laughter now. And so I remember looking up on the stage and looking at the lawyer and hoping that he would say something to rescue me. He looked down at me. We caught eyes. And then he looked out at the audience, and they were still laughing. And so he just looked back. And I could see, he could tell in my face that I wanted him to say something to help me. And they just moved to the next question. And so that was awakening for me. I knew at that point that I had probably just reached the point where, you know, that can actually destroy a child. You know, we're talking about your self-esteem and all that. And so what I needed somebody to come in and rescue me. I needed somebody to help me. This is grandmom, you know, with me early on. And if you look through the house, you can see these lamps. There's some lamps, some evidence of art, because one uncle was a sculptor, and the other one was a painter. So in the 1950s, growing up, for me in a household where there were other images other than the Christ figure or Martin Luther King or somebody, you know, I had real art that I was looking at. And my father worked at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, you know, and so we would go to the museum constant. So I would run around the museum just really kind of having a great time and hoping one day that I would be up there on the walls. And so here are the little kid, Earl, little EB, and something spilled in my grandparents' photo album that I don't want to change. I don't want to erase it because we live in a time of Photoshop and you can actually go in and clean it all up. But it's such a reminder of what I had come through. And so I keep that. And this man, here's the one that saved my life. Oh no, he scared me. This man, this is my Uncle Bradley. I owe my life to this man. He introduced me, I guess he had an epiphany one night. And he lived in New Jersey, in Cherry Hill. And this is the one that was teaching and had gone and graduated from Temple, from Tyler. He was teaching at Temple, full professor. And I said, he must have had an epiphany one night. He came, I guess he decided that I'm going to go over across the bridge, the Tacony-Palmar Bridge, and I'm going to get my nephew, pick up my nephew, my sister's son. They're having so many problems with him, so much, you know, let me see what I can do. So he left his three daughters. He left his wife on that Saturday, came across the bridge, knocked on my door and said, "Come with me." Not knowing where I was going. Getting in the car, and I know I'm going with my Uncle Bradley. And we go, and we end up at Saturday morning art class at Temple, Tyler. It was Temple School Art League at that time on Broad Street. And so I walk into this place. the smell of linseed oil and turpentine filled the room. And there were kids in there just doing their thing. And I'm in there like, my God, this is amazing. This is my tribe. I knew automatically this was my tribe. And my uncle introduced me to my tribe. And not only did he introduce me to my tribe, he introduced me to my passion. And so, as I tell the kids, this changes the whole game. This changes everything. I believe that we are in that process of trying to find a tribe. And many of our children are suffering because they're trying to, our tribes are very limited, when we look at their choices. They're limited because of what the society offers. But in actuality, it's really a grand span of possibilities. But we only show the few, right? And so they only think that there's only that many. And so they have the only choice of that. Am I going to go into the gang? Am I going to go into the rap game? The choices. This man said, okay, I'm going to do this for you. So he didn't do this one Saturday. He did this for 6 years straight. For 6 solid years, he sacrificed his family on that Saturday to be with me. I owe him everything. He came to me not only knowing that, he said, I know you're struggling reading, but this the fact that you like to draw is not going to make you an artist. All the artists that I know are very well read, very, very bright, very intelligent, very astute. If you want to become an artist, you need to do this. And he hands me a book. He says, I'm going to give you a book every month, and I want you to read it fully, and I'm going to ask questions to make sure you've read it. And so here's the first one. I know you love Modigliani. So here's Modigliani. He gave me Modigliani. I read, struggled. Next month, Picasso, Renoir, Cezanne, Tanner to let me know African-American artist was doing the same thing. And before you know it, I was running out of the house on my own to the library to get these books. I became this voracious reader. And it was all because I was attached to my passion. And so, long story short, I decided to go to college. It was the only obvious thing to do because 1, that's where he was teaching. 2, is that's where you had to go to take it to the next level. And 3, it was where the tribe was. Tyler School of Art. I only applied to 1. I got in. When I graduated with a 3.94 average, and was upset I didn't get a straight A average. And the reason being is because that situation that happened to me in 6th grade created a monster that I wanted never again to feel that experience of being laughed at. And so what it has done, it has created, if anybody who knows me knows that I am driven. And I don't know how to stop it. I know I tried to by saying to myself, you know what, I don't need to be the best artist in the world. I need to be the best for the world. And so that shift changed it. It helped me kind of guide myself and not have to put the pressure on myself as much as I do. So my pressure now is on the things that I'm going to do to actually, how do I benefit the world? How do I be the best for the world? And so my art, to talk about the work, it's interesting. When I graduated from Temple, I majored in illustration, graphic design, and I had art education as a background because you needed something to fall back on. You didn't want to be the starving artist, so teaching. I got a teaching degree. And then I always always had a minor in painting because I always knew. And then when I would go to my professors and said, I wanted to pursue this career, one guy, John Wade, said, I don't think you should go into illustration because your work is too powerful, your drawings are too powerful for illustration. I didn't understand that, but I knew that that's where the job was, in a sense. That's what he said. But he said, just paint, and the money will come. Don't worry about the money, just paint, the money will come. And so when I got out to, went into the industry, but I was ill prepared for the business side of illustration. They didn't prepare us for that. They didn't prepare us, they put us, our craft, yes, the technical, the ideas about what it takes to become an artist, but the part of how do you go out and get the job? How do you go in to an office and present yourself? I wasn't prepared for that. And so what I did is I fell back on my art. Fell back on my teaching degree. And so I started to teach. But at that time, there were no permanent positions. And so what I was doing, I was subbing, mostly. I subbed second grade for a couple years, and I subbed high school for a few years up in the Chamonix High. And then I decided that I was going to, there was a permanent position at Trenton Psychiatric, not Trenton Psychiatric, before that it was Woodhaven. It was a permanent position working at Woodhaven, working with the emotionally disturbed children, at all basic different ranges of retardation. And so I got a permanent position there. It was great. And so I started to develop no painting at all, just in there doing that. And then I decided that I wanted to then teach, and I was there as a client care worker. They did not allow me to use my degree, so I needed to find a way to use my degree. And there was an ad in the newspaper, in Trenton newspaper, the Philadelphia Inquirer, but for the Trenton Psychiatric Hospital. And the ad was, and I have some people here from that hospital, from that life ago. The ad was for an industrial art teacher. I had no background in industrial art at all. And so I figured I could go in and dazzle them, And so I went to the interview, and I knew that I was a woodshop monitor at college. So I knew my way around a woodshop. I could take a machine down, break it down, bring it back up, oil the whole 9 yards, and I knew how to work in wood. And so when I got there, realizing that Lottie Dews, she was the one who introduced me. It was interviewing me, and the one who ultimately hired me. She said, what I said was, you're going to get an art teacher plus someone who has a background working with your population, and then, which at that time was emotionally disturbed adolescent, and then you're going to get somebody who knows their way around a wood shop. So she saw the bargain and hired me. And then she said you had to go back to school to get your master's in special ed. So I am now, totally in a totally different direction, and I decided to go to get my degree in special ed. So I got the degree and come out, and now I'm teaching, I'm doing teaching GED, teaching all sorts of things, and I'm just enjoying it, working with this population. But at the same time, there's a point where I was working there for about 12 years, in the field probably about 15 or so, and realizing that in this institution, you're not seeing any success. The students are becoming, basically institutionalized. And I wanted to see some success. You would think that you would have some, and 3 months later, they're back. And you're like, darn. And just in the nick of time, I'm ahead of myself. Because at that point, I was starting to take my little classroom, and in the corner of my classroom, I create a little studio where I would paint. So I started painting every day after class. And I had this body of work that I would show only the students that would come into the class. They would see, some of my colleagues would see the art. And then I decided that I was going to actually then take and show some friends. And fortunately, I showed a guy that was starting a jazz group. And he showed me, he asked me, we're putting a jazz group together, and this is a guy who did our album cover. What do you think of it? I said, that's all right. So you can do better? I said, yeah. And so I took a painting and put it in, sampled it, because my graphic design, came in, skills came in, and I gave it, and he loved it. The group loved it. And so what happened is that they ended up showing it, of course, on the cover, but someone in Camden, New Jersey saw it, and he had a museum. And he saw it and asked the guy, my friend Al, do you know this artist personally? He said, sure. I said, I would love to see more of his work. It's great. And so he calls me, says, Earl, guy in Camden has a museum there, a little small place, but he wants to see more of your work. I'm like, whoa, this is great. Now I'm getting some attention for this work that I'm doing. And no one saw it. I was only painting for myself. And so I go to the interview, show the guy. He's like, my God, this is exactly what we need. We're having a show of 2 other artists. We would love you to be the 3rd artist. You have enough work? I said, yeah, I got it. He said, great. So I'm like, great. I go, now he says, can you get a slide of your work? Slide of these so I can have them. And I've never taken slides of my work. So what I did was I called a friend, one of the colleagues at, one of my colleagues, but one of my professors at the university at Temple, John Wade again, and he was great in taking photographs of his paintings. I said, how do you do that? He walked me through it. So I had now this sleeve of images of my work, first time. I'm like, whoa, this is great. And so I said, I've never had anything like this before. This might get me into a gallery in Philadelphia. And so I said, why not? Why not try? So I took this slide sleeve to the different galleries. I walked into one gallery, and I saw that the sign said, by appointment only to show work. I said, well, listen, I'm going to bypass that, and I'm just going to go in. And I know curiosity would just kill them. So I walked in, I said, I'm an artist, I want to show you my work. He said, well, by appointment only. I said, but I'm here now. And you're not doing anything, Can you look at my work? He said, okay, because they don't want to let somebody out that might be the next whomever, And so I knew that's going to capture him. And so he's looking, and he says, oh my God, these are great. How can I get them? I said, well, I'm going to have a show in Camden, and when I'm finished the show, you can get them. I'm like, okay. And so then I went to the next gallery, and they said the same thing. And I'm like, wait a minute, at some point, I can't show in all these galleries. And so I end up going to this one gallery on Chestnut Street, and I walked in, and they said, the person who looks at the work is not here. Can you leave him? I'm like, I figured I just showed half the city. Sure. And so I left them. And about a week or so passed, and I just realized I don't have my slides. So I call the gallery up. I said, I left some slides there of my work. Is there, can I come in and get them? So, yeah, we haven't looked at them, but the lady, the owner, she's here. She'll look at them by the time you get here. So I'm coming in from Trenton, New Jersey, from the wood shop, and I'm covered in dust, right? And I'm walking in, and I'm looking like I just came from under something. And they're standing in the doorway with my slides. And I walked in, and they're looking like, okay, watch where he goes, And I'm watching them, and then they said, can we help you? And I said, yes, you're looking at my work. Said, this is yours? I said, yes, this is my work. He said, wow, this is incredible. How can we get this? I said, well, we got to stand in line kind of thing. I didn't say that, but, but I said that right now I'm getting ready to have this show in Camden. And when it's finished, yes. He said, well, we have a better idea. The work that's getting ready to show, we had the conversation, the work that's getting ready to show, is it framed? I said, no. We have a framer. How about we have it framed for you, and you don't have to pay for it until after your show. And we get to put it in our walls until you have your show. I'm like, that's a good idea. So we did that. And I said, but you can't sell anything. She said, we understand. Okay. So you go in, put the work up, and then I got a call a couple weeks later. We have some people that want to buy your work. I said, we can't. He said, no, how about we sell it, and then you get to keep it and then take it back. They all understand that you need it for the show at the museum, and it'll be great. I said, okay, that's a good idea. The whole show sold out. And I'm saying, whoa, so now the guy at the museum is pissed off because he doesn't have work to sell. And I didn't understand the business part of all that. And so we had the show, and then I ended up showing at this gallery. And so that's how I ended up on Chestnut Street. They went out of business after about 3 years because they couldn't make a living just on my work. And so I said, where can I go to the next guy? I'm going to leave here. Who can you recommend? The top gallery in the city I want to be. And she says, well, this is Gross McLeish. I would go to Rosenfeld, Richard Rosenfeld. I said, okay. I went around to Richard and I said, I just left the gallery on Chestnut Street, and I want to know if you can look at my work. And he looked at the work. He said, I already know who you are. I would love to have you. And I've been with Richard for almost 30 years. And so that was the beginning of my career. And so I've been showing at Richard Roosevelt's gallery and basically painting the river. That's where I got my chops. I ended up working, just going down on the Schuylkill River. I loved Thomas Aiken's work. And I went down there and I figured I can just go down with my fresh eyes. And that's what I think what artists do. We kind of, there's a path that has been kind of set before us from the other artists that went before us. And they take it to as far as they can take it. And it's our job to then take it to the next level. And what we do as artists, we're basically documenters. We document life. And so what happens if you start to look at a work and understand not only the visual artists, but the writers, right, poets, the dancers, the musicians, all of us are pretty much speaking the same language, it's just in a different form. You know, the idiom is different. But it's the same language. We're doing the same thing. We're documenting life. So there's a scene that you'll see, for example, I don't have it here, but I'll show you here when I start showing the slides, but it's an image of Ocean City. And there's a pier, 59th Street Pier, and at one time there was a little structure there that has since fallen into the ocean. All you see now is the pylons. So I was able there to be at the right time to capture that. But say it wasn't me, say if it was a photographer or a writer, for that matter, and sitting there writing about that piece on top of that structure there before it fell into the ocean and washed away, swept away, and did an incredible piece. So that's what we do, we're documenting. But also when I realized that, if someone asked me, who's my favorite artist, actually someone did, and they asked, it was a movie, what's the movie? Midnight in Paris. Oh, love the movie. And I'm with a friend, and he hadn't seen the movie, and I said, I just came from an incredible movie, loved it, and I told him the premise of the movie. And I said, and after telling the premise, he said, well, if you can go back in time, who would you want to see? And I said, I would want to see Picasso. And he said, okay. And I told him why. He said, if you only asked him one question, what would it be? I said, whoa. And I thought about it. I remember reading this wonderful little book of Picasso. It was called Picasso on Art, and where he's interviewed, and these questions are posed to him, but not only his answer, but the answer that would be given by the various incredible minds of our time, okay? And Socrates and Plato and people like this. It was a wonderful little book. And so I remember Picasso was talking about researchers. And he says, people who spend their lifetime in research and looking for something, no one really cares what they're looking for. No one really cares. They only want to know what you found. So that's what I would have asked Picasso. What did you find? And so knowing that, I know, and I said that to myself, and so I asked the question myself, if someone asked me in my 56 years, what have I found? And that would be less is more. Right? Less is more. I think we would be in a better situation in our country if we had adopted that. But one of the things about artists that I realized from this man here is that we are, in a society, very frightening people, the artists. So much so, if you look through antiquity, every time there was an overthrow of power, anytime there was an overthrow of power, all through history, Nazi Germany, Communist China, Russia, Cuba, whenever there was an overthrow of power, coup d'etat, the first people to be persecuted, or not, like for example, in Nazi Germany, wasn't the Jews and the Polish, were the artists. You come, put them in a room, lock the doors, lock them in, and set the place ablaze. And you do that because we are critical thinkers of the society. We're the ones that ask the questions why. And how come we're not going in that direction as opposed to the direction that they want us to lead as sheep? And so that empowered me, realizing that I'm providing that particular function. And so along the way, let me go through it before we get into that, because I want to then start showing the work. The pieces that you're going to see, as I'm going to talk to you about them as we go through, this was one of the first pieces when I started to decide after that probably 8 years had passed before I actually painted. And so this was the very first painting. Actually, Michelle owns this piece. This is not in, these are some of the pieces were in that first show, okay? So this is what they were looking at in the beginning of my work when they were seeing these paintings. I I love painting children. I've always loved painting children, but I've also loved painting water. My mother worked at, when she was a stay-at-home mom, and then when we all got of age in high school, she decided to go get a job at the bank. And they had, oftentimes in some of these banks, they have shows, art shows. And so she called me, she says, come up to the art museum, come up to my job, they're having a show there, and I want you to see the work. I know how much you like to paint. So I go in, and there was a painting there in watercolor of a body of water. And it just blew me away. I was like, my God, you can paint like this in watercolor and make water look so real? And that was just my quest to, can I make water real like that? And so I just started to find myself in areas that provided the opportunity for me to paint water. And so this is down at the Schuylkill River. And the rowers down there, and I loved it. I actually would go down there so often that they actually started to take me out onto the boats and then started to teach me how to row. So it was great. I loved that opportunity that was afforded me. This is also, now sometimes I'm working from the photograph, and then there are times I'm working on location. So this one was done on location, where I would get up, probably about 4 o'clock in the morning, to get there, to be set up for the fog, the raising of the fog. I love that when the fog is just lifting off the water. And I guess, it was just that point of being there. It was only 2 times you go out. You only go out early in the morning, very much like a photographer, and late in the evening, in the late afternoon, early evening, because that's the only time when you get those dramatic light. And I realized that my painting is really about light. And so where do I find it? Where can I go? What do I have to do to get the light? New Hope, Pennsylvania. This is the Shad Fest. And I'm an avid fisherman. So I went down there with paintbrush in one hand, fishing rod in the other, down there, just paint out there, my fishing rod in the water, and then sketching and having just a good time at it. A family in New Jersey, the Weissels, a very wealthy family, invited me to paint their horses. And so they said, come out to our stables, beautiful stables. It was like somebody's mansion. The horses were living in their own mansion, And I get out there, and I jump out my truck, and the horses are over there just grazing. And I'm like, oh, my God, this is like picturesque. And I jump out my truck, and I fall in love with the wheelbarrow. I didn't paint a horse the whole time. I painted a stupid wheelbarrow. And so, needless to say, they never invited me back. But I had a great time painting that wheelbarrow. Like, that's not a horse. You see a horse there? You challenge yourself, and one of my challenges was finding out if I could paint detail and how much, and then knowing that one of the things about painting is about mystery. It's about gestalt, that whole process of completing the circle. And so one of the things that I realized, if you go into a gallery, museum, and you see a painting that is so incredibly detailed, your brain goes, whoa, that is just like amazing. And you go like, oh my God, he painted every brick, and you can even see the license plate. Like, wow. And your brain goes, yeah, got it, because it got it. And then next thing you know, you go, got it, got it, got it. And before you know it, you're out of the gallery because the brain has already captured it. And so it's nothing for it to work towards. And so what you have to do is you leave the gap. And so if you look at people like I love, like N.C. Wyeth, those shadows, what happens in the shadows, you assume that the rest of the legs are there, but it's not. It's all in shadow, but the brain says, got it, no, I don't. Got it, no, I don't. And it keeps coming back. And so I wanted to put detail, but I also wanted to work in the shadows. So you feel that I have all this detail, but in actuality, there's nothing there. This a challenge. This was a large painting. This was probably one of the, not the largest I've painted. This one is about 30 by 40. And I wanted to challenge myself and see if I can actually produce a piece that with the same kind of, intimacy that you get from a small piece, but in that grand scale. And so I love Logan Circle and being able to capture the wetness, the sense of metal, the sense of the patina, the sense of the cement, the water, the whole 9 yards, capturing all that, because that's necessary, to tell the story. And if it's not all there, then it's not told properly. So, and this is now before children's books. Okay. Ocean City. This is that building, that little structure that I was telling you about, that is no longer there. How many of you know that 59th Street, right? Yep. The whole pier is going now. Yeah. Florida. This is a painting of just a quiet scene. I remember my Aunt Emma loved sewing, and so she had this Singer sewing machine, Truttle sewing machine. When I went up onto the second floor of the place where I was staying and saw that, it's like, whoa! And the light again. The light was just magnificent. Charleston. Now these are more recent pieces. I ended up buying a home in Charleston because I went down to do research for a book called Circle Unbroken about the sweetgrass basket women. And I got down there and fell in love with Charleston. So I ended up buying a home, and there's a section of town where I was doing the landscape. I was down there, there's an artist down there by the name of Mary White, okay? And when I was introduced to Charleston, it was because of an author had come to me and said, I love your work. I want to know if you would take a look at my manuscript. And I said, well, you don't do that. She said, I know, but can you just take a look at it? And so I said, okay. I'm sitting there in a conference, and I read it. I said, oh my God, this is amazing. She said, would you do it? I said, I don't know. I have to find my agent and see if he can sell it, and if it's sold, then yes, I'll do it. And so it happened. She said, I live in Kiowa. I want you and your family to come down and stay with us for the week or whatever, and just kind of see what this is all about. So I said, okay. So we go down into Charleston. I'm like, you're driving down Bohicket Drive with the canopy and trees. I'm like, this is like surreal. It is such a beautiful, setting. And so I get there and we go through the house, and I'm noticing that she's taking me, showing me her work. And I said, oh, Mary White. She said, you know her? I said, well, yeah, I went to school with her. She and her husband, Smitty. I used to show with them in a gallery in Philadelphia. She says, oh, well, they're here. I said, they're here? Yeah, I knew they moved. I didn't know they moved here. She said, yeah. I said, oh my God, we got to go see him. So I go in, and Smitty's in there in the gallery. Mary White's work's all over, and I go and I tap him on the shoulder, and he looks at me and says, Earl, Smitty, what are you doing there? And it was great, and so I ended up showing there. But he said that I could not paint figures. I can paint the landscape, but I can't paint the figure. So I can paint the landscape of Charleston, but I can't paint the figure. And so I said, oh, fine. It was fine with me for a bit. Then I realized that they didn't want me to compete with Mary, that my work was competing with Mary's, and he couldn't take that, And so I had to leave the gallery. But when I was there, I said, he said, can you come, you paint in which, I said, can I come in town? I want to come in town and paint something other than the low country, the marshes. So I came in town, and I realized if I came in town, the only thing I would be painting, the same thing everybody else has been painting, the courtyards, the flower boxes, the carriages. I'm like, I don't want to paint that stuff. So I went out just outside, and there's a section of town called Crosstown. And I started doing some research and realizing that this section of town, in the next 5 years or so, will no longer be there because they're building this bridge and because of gentrification. In the past 10 years, over 65,000 people have been displaced because of gentrification. And so I'm like, you know what, this is a great project. So I'm going to document this section of town before it no longer exists. And so these are some of the paintings of the people and children in that town that I'm documenting before it no longer goes. So it's going to be a coffee table book with an anthropological component to it to talk about this section. And this painting is, and they have titles. The cover of the book is one little painting back there on the table. It's a little girl. She's with a clapboard, white clapboard, red ball on the bottom, and it's called True Colors. and it's called True Colors because her red, white, and her blue mood. Okay, so all the paintings have titles like this. This one is called Repose, and it's about the wall as much as about the little boy sitting in front of it, about the crumbling of his foundation. And so it's going to be a book that is going to have not only photographs, sketches, my watercolors, and my oils now, because I'm starting to do oils. So this is one of the paintings from that as well. This is John Rankin's house. I went up to, I'm opening a place in Kentucky. I went there they hired me to come up to do their first annual children's book festival. They wanted me to be their keynote speaker for their very first annual children's book festival in Kentucky. And so I get there, and it so happens that the book that I was working on takes place as a slave narrative. And it takes place right there in Kentucky, and right in the area where I was. And so I said, can I come back here and do my next book? Oh my God, you kidding? Sure, come on back. What do we have to do to get you back? Can we help? I said, yeah, I need, and you'll see that process in my slide presentation. I said, I need a dog. I said, we got them. And I said, I need a little boy. We got those. And so they gathered all this. So I went back, a couple weeks later, and I'm there painting, doing a photo shoot of this whole book. And then they take me up to where the slave would have actually run on the other side of the Ohio River, John Rankin's house. And there are 300 stairs to get up to his house. And this lantern there, because when a lot of times they would let them know, the slaves, that it would be safe to come to the house by the lantern in the window. And so that's why it's strange that you see a lantern and a candle next to each other, because when it wasn't safe, they would take it out, put it up on the counter. And so the name of this painting is Wanted by Land. And so, and what I'm doing is this is going to be the cover of the coffee table book for the safe houses. I'm doing a coffee table book on safe houses from the South up to Canada. Okay. So this is John Rankin's house, Wanted by Land. This is how I got into children's books. Okay. The owner of this painting is in the back there, Mr. Barry, and half of these paintings in here belong to Mr. Barry and his wife. I thank you, Mr. Barry. He's one of my major collectors, and so I have to go to him to get my work. So he and there's most of them, when they collect in the 20s and the 30s. And so a lot of my collectors all over the world are collecting, and he's my closest one and my dear friend. And so this is one of the first pieces you purchased, isn't it? I was still at Trenton Psychiatric Hospital. This is one of the first pieces. I was still at Trenton Psychiatric Hospital when he got this piece. This is called The Children of Jacob. And this was inside of this magazine. And an agent called me up. What happened was I never submitted work to a contest. So I think that it's subjective, judging. How do you determine one piece over another? And it all depends on who the judges are at that particular time. So I never did, but this particular time, I was looking through a magazine, and in the back of the magazine, they had an ad, an advertisement for a contest. And the contest, if you won, you would get watercolor paper. Like, okay, you know what? I'm going to try to get some watercolor paper, because it's a contest, but maybe I might win and get some watercolor paper. So anyway, I put my work in, send a $20 submission fee for it, and some weeks go by, and I get a contact. Mr. Lewis, thank you for your submission, but you didn't win. Right? Great. No call. But a week later, I get another call. And this guy says, I was one of the jurors in the contest, and I loved your work. I thought you should have won. But I'm the editor-in-chief of the Artist magazine, and I want to know if you'd be interested in being featured. I'm like, are you kidding? No. Of course, yes. By all means, And so he said, okay, he said, send me some work. I send him more work, and then he calls back. He says, we love the work, so can we feature you on the cover? No, And so I'm like, sure. So I'm realizing that this was a better award than getting a paper. And so I get this, this magazine comes out. And I'm now the vice president of the Philadelphia Watercolor Club. This is how things happen. Howard Watson is the president. So every second Tuesday or something of every month, we would go in and have a meeting. And I walk in the meeting, and Howard said, we're taking notes in minutes or whatever. He says, before we start taking notes, Earl, you got a phone call. It's a gentleman that's called you. His name is Jeff something, and he's children's books. I don't know what, but take his number down, give him a call. I said, okay. And I take the number down. Unbeknownst to me, I wasn't the only one that took the number. There was another artist in the room who took the number down as well. And so I get home, a month passed, and I didn't call. And I'm going through my notes for minutes before so I get prepared for the meeting, and I'm looking and I see at the top, oh, darn it, I didn't call that guy. I better call him because I know Howard is going to go. As soon as I get in there, he's going to call me and ask me, did you call him? I'm like, so I got to call. So I get on the phone. I said, hello, my name is Earl Lewis. I understand that you called the Watercolor Club looking for me. Oh, yeah. My name is Jeff Dwyer, and I represent authors and illustrators of kids' books. And I saw the Artist magazine and the painting of the children and Jacob inside, and I wanted to know if you're interested in doing kids' books. I said, no. And he said, really? I said, no, I'm not interested. He said, why? I said, because I'm a fine artist and not an illustrator. He said, what's the difference? And I went on to explain what the difference was. Now, the difference for you is that illustration is the interpretation or visual interpretation of the written word. And it's generated by someone outside of yourself. A problem is presented. And the problem is presented to sell something. So your illustrations are attached to sell something. So in editorials to sell an ad, and advertise to sell a product, and children's book to sell the text, so on and so forth. And I knew I didn't do that. The fine illustrator, the fine artist, basically gives themselves a philosophical problem in which to solve. And then you go off to solve that without, it's still problem solving, it's just where it's generated. So I knew I didn't do the latter. And so I decided, I called him and I said, no, I'm not interested. He said, are you familiar with some of the people that I think are doing some fine illustration and books today? He said, do you know who Chris Van Allsburg is? I said, no. He said, Barry Moser? No. Like my sons, they love Eric Carle and Stephen Williams and Bea B. Williams and Stephen Kellogg, people like that. And so I said, I didn't know these guys. He says, okay. Can you send me your work anyway? Sure. On my lunch break, I decided I was teaching at Trenton Psychiatric Hospital, and in Lawrenceville, there was a pizza place that I used to go to, and right down the pizza place was a bookstore called Wit and Wisdom. Right? I go in, and this woman's in there, and I say, I might have an opportunity to do children's books, but I don't really know from books. Can you help me out? She says, sure. So she puts me over in a corner in the store, and she comes, this little small woman comes over with a pile of books that she can barely, and she sits down next to me, and she says, let me show you books. And she opened first one. She says, this one works. This is why it works. And she took me through why it worked. Put that one down. This one doesn't work. Let me show you why. And she took me through this edification that was amazing for 2 solid weeks. Every day on my lunch break, I would go to this bookstore and look at this work and being educated by this woman. So I called the guy back because I said, you know what? I want to do children's books. He said, I knew you'd be interested. So I took the liberty of sending your slides to 9 different publishers. I said, really? He said, yeah, well, we'll see. Don't get excited. I said, I would love to do them, but I have artists that I can't get work for, authors that I can't get work for, but I love your work. See what happens. 3 or 4 days pass. He gives me a call back. He says, guess what happened? I said, what? He said, 6 of those 9 publishers want you to do books for them. I said, really? What's that mean? He said, quit your job. And so that's when I gave my 2-week notice at Trenton Psychiatric Hospital. And so as a result, I went off. The first year, I was scared to death. And by the end of the week, all 9 had given me contracts. All 9 publishers had given me contracts. So I did 5 books that first year because I was scared to death. And so then I started getting contracts, And then I started getting booked so now I'm like booked to 2018, 19. I'm always probably 6, 7 years ahead in my booking, and I'm with every publisher in the country. I've done 58 books in 17 years, and I guess I'm an illustrator now. And so that's how it started. But the woman, Greenie Newberg, at the bookstore, right? When I told this story in the library, someone says, "You were taught by Greenie Newberg?" I mean, that was a woman? You know who she is? Also the lady at the bookstore. She said, no. Greenie Newberg used to run the bookstore, the famous bookstore, children's bookstore in DC called the Cheshire Cat. He said, so you were taught by the best. I'm like, whoa, so that's how things work. And so and not only that, the guy who took the number down, my agent calls and says, do you know Don from the Watercolor Club? So I said, yeah. He said, well, he sent me his work too. I said, oh, okay, cool. And to this day, he has not been able to get a book. So it was for me. It was my work. I mean, it was that call was for me. You know, it was my destiny. And so this is how I got in. This is my very first book, Fire on the Mountain. And basically, the way it starts are what are called thumbnail sketches. I do these little small sketches to start the dialogue, not with the author, because the author and the illustrator never meet. It's with the editor, the art director, the designer. And so once I do that, I take these little thumbnail sketches and I enlarge it to what is called the dummy book. This is where I have to now enlarge to see what it looks like in scale, then take the manuscript, cut it up, paste it down, see what the words look like with the text, with the images. And then these little crude drawings then have to come to life. This is about a little boy named Alamayu. He lives in the high mountains of Ethiopia. He's raising his family sheep, sitting and playing a makeshift flute, and there's some mountains in the background. In order for this to come to life, I have to do some work. I go to the library. I spent hours in the library looking at reference material. I want to know what Ethiopia looks like. So I'm in there looking at graphic information, photographs of Ethiopia, the mountains, the trees, the cars, the children, what they wear, the whole 9 yards, and I gather that. Then I leave there and I go into the stacks. And so then I'm looking and reading the books on the culture. Then I find my models. In the beginning, I had no idea how one found a model. I remember driving down 60th and Woodland Avenue one day, and a little boy walking down the street. I'm like, oh, God, he's perfect. But I realized you can't do that. You go to jail. And so I had to find another way to get kids. And so I go to schoolyards now. You see me outside the schoolyard. No, I'm only kidding. Now, I mean, I was getting from friends and family, and then school. So now it's hard it's not easy. I mean, it's not difficult at all. I just can go into any school, and they all know who I am. And I say I'm looking for some kids. They're like, oh, please. And so that's how I get my kids. But in this case, I need a little Ethiopian boy. So I went down on Baltimore Avenue in West Philadelphia, and there's a restaurant called Dialects. And I go in, I said, I need a little 7-year-old. They said, well, we don't serve them. And so I get this little guy, dress him up in his native clothing, put him in front of a great big stone in the art museum, because in Philadelphia we don't have mountains. We have hills, but the only hill I can remember is behind the art museum. And so I removed the trees and put mountains in the background from my photographs from the library. So when I finished, the painting looked like this. Okay? And so if you look, I'm not copying the photograph at all. It's an interpretation of the photograph. I don't like my images to look like photographs. I don't want them to. It's one of the worst things that people don't understand. They're like, oh my God, your work looks like a photograph. But I know they're giving a compliment. But to an artist, it's like the worst compliment you can ever give. And so, but this is the essence of what that piece is. The waterfall that you see there, the little kid playing a flute. So I needed a waterfall. So I went to the library, got a great photograph of a waterfall. And then I needed my little kid, dressed him up, had him walk towards me several times, probably about 20, 25 times. And then I combine this plus this, get you this. Okay? So it's kind of an amalgamation, if you will, working with several photographs to get one. Sometimes I'm working with as many as 4, 5, 6 photographs at one time to get that image. Only a Pigeon. This one was interesting. This was a book where I couldn't actually do the research because there was no research on it in the library. And these are kids who actually raise pigeons in Ethiopia. So in order to actually do this one, I needed to go to Ethiopia. And so what I did is I hopped on a plane by myself, and I ended up in Africa. And I stayed 5 weeks by myself, and it was an incredible trip. I not only went to, I was in Addis, in Demidola, and Gambela. Then I left there and went into Kenya. I was in Nairobi and Mombasa. It was just a great time. And I worked along with the kids. I had kids work alongside me as I demonstrated how to paint in watercolor. I spoke at about a dozen embassies. About half a dozen embassies, about a dozen schools. It was just a great time. Down the road, about a little girl gets responsibility for the first time to go buy eggs for her mother and father. You see that why the eggs never make it home. And what happens is she comes across an apple tree. And she says, if I bring home apples along with these eggs, my family's going to think I'm special. So she's reaching for this big papa-sized apple. She's not mindful of the eggs in the basket. They all roll out, break every one of them. Now she's upset, dejected, climbing to the apple tree. Her mother and father are worried about her. So they come out looking for the daughter, and they see her up in the tree. They see the eggs broken at the base of the tree, so they don't yell at her. They don't scold her. Instead, they climb up to the apple tree with her. Okay? And at the end of the story, instead of having eggs for breakfast the next morning, they have apple pie. Alice Scherdo is the author of that book. Bapu and his violin. This book won me the first Coretta Scott King Award that I won. And winning those awards is cool. I love the way the badges look on the books more than I love I just gave me a box of them and just put them on the book, whether I won or not. And so, you get a call at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they call you up, and they're on a speakerphone. They must. Like, is this E.B. Lewis? Yes, this is he. And they scream at the top of their lungs, like, congratulations, you just won the Coretta King Award. You jump around the house, like, oh my God, it's great. And so the next year, I'm like still reeling from that. Next year, they give me a phone call again and says, Mr. Lewis, guess what? You won it again. I'm like, wow, 2 years in a row, wow. And if that wasn't good enough, they called me again the next year and said, Mr. Lewis, again, you won it again. So I'm the only illustrator in the country who won that award 3 years in a row. And I think I won it more than anybody in the country because I've won it probably like 6 or 7 times. And so they don't give it to me anymore. Because people were actually complaining that I won it too many times. So now they had to be very cautious and careful. Bibbidi Bob Barbershop, about a little boy's first haircut. This is a little guy in Jersey. Yeah, a little kid in Jersey. I love his face. So they skipped a year in the awards, and they gave it to me again for this book. Talking about Bessie. And this is about the female aviator, Bessie Coleman. I love my hair. This is a book where the little girl's wearing these pigtails. She says, my pigtails are my favorite style of all. And one of these days, these pigtails are going to turn into wings, and I'm just going to take off and fly. And I'm like, oh, that would be so cool to show the little girl flying with pigtail wings. And so we realized that I need to see it before I can paint it. And the kids are not flying yet. And so I got to figure out how to, I did this, I strung her up. That's her father. Her father is 6'8". I'm 6'3", so get a sense. He's here. She's over his head. Her sister's on the top step saying, can I do it next? Can I do it next? And you don't see the mom because she's having a fit in the background. Whatever you do, do not drop my daughter. The same book, the little girl's hair is going into cornrows. So being an illustrator is very much like being a magician. I turn her into cornrows. Little Cliff's first day of school. This is a series of books. The first one was Little Cliff and the Porch People, Little Cliff's first day of school, and then the last one was Little Cliff and the Cold Place by Clifford Talbert. Really incredible author and amazing speaker. I went to hear him speak one day, it just blew me away. But every one of my books, I do this. This is my trademark. I put a hugging scene in all my books. So this is Little Cliff being embraced by his great-grandmama, Mama Pearl. And then the other side comes out. When I read this the first time, generally it takes about a week, 2 weeks before I will actually say I want to do the book. I need to live with it. And once I live with it, I said, okay, I can see myself. I can see that that it has. If you look at my body of work, you'll see that the common thread is strong human interest story, stories that tug at the heartstring. And so the publishers, the reason probably a book is far in advance is because they know that if a manuscript comes across their desk that has an emotional context to it, that they will probably 9 times out of 10 get E.B. Laws to do it. So that's what I do, emotion. And so when I read this one for the first time, I didn't have to wait 2 weeks, I didn't have to wait a week. I called them up as soon as I read it and said, I have to do this book. It was the first time being introduced to Jackie Woodson's work. And so I read this book, and it's like, my God, it came, so many, and when I was a kid, to keep myself from the embarrassment, save myself from the embarrassment of getting up, I would call books to memory. So when I came and stood in front of the class, I was actually reciting and not reading. And so that was my way of circumventing, compensating for that. And so what I started to learn how to do is starting to learn and develop that. And so now when I go to schools, I do poems and sonnets and recite. So I will do this one for you. But I'm going to set this one up. I remember sitting in front of a first or second grade group, and I had the book in front of me, and I said, this is the antidote. I said, wait a minute, they won't know what an antidote is, but kids will surprise you. I said, wait a minute, let me find out. Any of you know what an antidote is? A little boy, first grade, raised his hand. I'm like, okay, what's an antidote? He said, it heals the poison. I'm like, whoa, that is a better answer than I was going to give. I said, exactly right. It heals the poison. I said, what's your name? He said, Tommy Scott. I said, from now on, I'm going to let everyone know that Tommy Scott said this book heals the poison. And I said, the poison, now when we're talking about the poison, we're talking about segregation and racism and bigotry and all the heinous things that happen to us in our country. And I said, this book actually heals that. And I gave an example, and I recited a poem, and I'm trying to remember I'm going to do a different poem for you guys. This is a tough poem by County Collins. It's called The Incident. Once riding in old Baltimore, heart-filled, head-filled with glee, I saw a Baltimorean looking straight at me. Now, I was 8 and very small, and he was no whit bigger, and so I smiled, but he poked out his tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until December. Of all the things that happened there, that is all I remember. The Incident. The Antidote, The Other Side, Jackie Woodson. That summer, the fence that stretched through our town seemed bigger. We lived in a big yellow house on one side of it. White people lived on the other. And Mama said, don't climb over the fence when you play. She said it wasn't safe. That summer, there was a girl who wore a pink sweater. Each morning, she climbed up on the fence and she sat there, stared over at our side. Sometimes I stared back. She never sat on that fence with anybody, that girl didn't. Once, when we were playing double dutch, she asked if she could play. My friend Sandra said no, without even asking the rest of us. I don't know what I would have said. Maybe yes, maybe no. That summer, everyone and everything on the other side of the fence seemed far away. And when I asked my mama why, she said because that's the way things had always been. Sometimes when me and Mom went into town, I saw that girl with her mama. She looked sad sometimes, that girl did. Don't stare, my mama said, it's not polite. Well, it rained a lot that summer. On rainy days, that girl sat on her fence in a raincoat, and she let herself get all wet, like she didn't even care. Sometimes I saw her dancing around a puddle, splashing and laughing. My mama would let me go out in the rain. That's why I bought you rainy day toys, my mama said. You stay inside here, where it's warm, safe, and dry. But every time it rained, I always looked for that girl, and I always found her somewhere near the fence. Someplace in the middle of summer, the rain stopped, and when I walked outside, the grass was damp, and the sun was already high up in the sky. I stood there with my hands up in the air. I felt brave that day. I felt free. I got close to that fence, and that girl asked me my name. Clover, I said. Mine's Annie, she said, Annie Paul. I live over yonder, she said, where you see the laundry. That's my blouse hanging on the line. She smiled then. She had a pretty smile, and then I smiled, and we stood there staring at each other, smiling. It's nice up on this fence, Annie said. You can see all over. I ran my hands along the fence, and I reached up to touch the top of it. A fence like this was made for sitting on, Annie said, and she looked at me sideways. Well, my mama said I shouldn't go on the other side. My mama said the same thing, but she never said about sitting on it. Neither did my own mama, I smiled. That summer, me and Annie sat up on that fence, and when Sandra looked at me funny, I just made believe I didn't care. Some mornings, my mama watched us. I waited for her to tell me to get down from that fence before you break your neck or something, but she never did. I see you made a new friend, she said one morning, and I nodded, and Mama smiled. That summer, me and Annie sat up on the fence and watched the whole wide world around us. One day, Sandra was playing double dutch near the fence, and we asked if we could play. I don't care, Sandra said. And when we jumped, Sandra and me were partners the way we used to be. And when we were too tired to jump anymore, we sat up on that fence, all of us, in one long line. Someday, someone's going to come along and knock this old fence down, Annie said. Yeah, I nodded. Someday. Jackie Woodson. Thank you. Sometimes my mama gets angry. It's about a little girl who's going through some tough times, and her mother's actually going through bipolar disorder. And B.B. Moore Campbell is the author of the book, and she passed away several years ago, but really powerful story. Dirt on the Skirts about the female baseball league from the 1940s. I did, the movie League of Their Own. So what I did was I needed models, so I went up to the Princeton Day School. They have adopted me. I go there almost every year, and I get there and I see the teachers. I say, oh my God, they're my models. So I dressed up these teachers in 1950s waitress outfits. I couldn't find their authentic baseball uniforms. So we went out on a Saturday morning to play baseball. So here's a first grade teacher dressed up like that. When she saw that, I came back to the school and showed these slides. She ran out of there screaming. And here's the painting. Circle and Broken. This is the book that took me to Charleston, about the sweetgrass basket women of Charleston. These baskets are amazing. It's a tradition that has been passed down from Africa all the way up to present day. The men were the ones who actually did the baskets in Africa. And now you see men doing it now. And so unfortunately, you don't see a lot of the younger kids doing it, so we're hoping that it will continue to continue on as a tradition. Coming on home soon. This is the book that won me the Caldecott honor. Winning the Caldecott, you just don't run around the house screaming, you run around the block screaming. And so, quite an honor to win Jackie Woodson. When you were born, a whole different approach, a whole other visual language. Painting is a language. It's a visual language. And this, basically, I just had to create another one as if learning how to speak French or Spanish or what have you. So I created this. I went and studied Odeon Rodin, Matisse, and Chagall, and a lot of kids' paintings, and came up with this. This little light of mine that I loved when I was growing up. I turned the song into visual lyrics. The Nietzsche Brown Class Clown. So I'm just going to go through a list of these, and so now I'm going to show you all 58 books, but My Best Friend Across the Alley, Night Boat to Freedom, Lily Brown's Paintings, The Legend of the Cape May Diamond. Oh, you didn't know I did that, huh? D is for Drinking Good. Keeping the Night Watch won a Coretta Scott King Award about 2 years ago. Won it again 2 years ago, last year for this book, The Negro Speaks of Rivers, Langston Hughes. And what an honor to be able to be on the same cover with Langston. I just finished a book. I got the honor of doing Maya Angelou. There's a leather-bound book that comes out this month. It's special edition. It's only 800 books, leather-bound. They're about $300 or so a book. And Maya has signed each copy. And so to have my name, and it's the book that I did with Maya, is the first time this book has ever been illustrated, because it's not a picture book, is I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings. And so that's out there. And then I get a call from Desmond Tutu. And Desmond says, I am his favorite illustrator in all the world. And so he said, I'm doing a Bible, and I would love you to illustrate my Bible. And I said, I don't have the time. And I said, but I would love if you can think of another way of getting me to be a part of it. He said, I think I have an idea. He calls back and says, I got an idea. What we'll do is that I'll get some of the top illustrators in the world to illustrate their page, but you get to pick your favorite illustration, which one you want to do. So I did The Last Supper. And I'm told when he saw it, he gasped. And these are some of the paintings from that. I Want to Be Free is a new book. Homegrown House, about a little girl who wants a house like grandmom's house. And grandmom tells her, you can't have a house like mine unless you live in it 30, 40 years. Stars Above Us, about a little girl who's afraid of the dark. And her father tells her there's no reason to be afraid of the dark because there's so many wonderful things that happen in the night sky. And so here she is with Dad enjoying the night sky. One of the things that happened, what I realized when I came into the industry, the black illustrators were only given projects that were of that culture, you know. And so I realized quickly that we were getting pigeonholed. And so I said, I want just good stories. I don't care if it's white or black. I understand that there's a void that has to be filled, you know, and I definitely want to be part of that, but I don't want you to limit me in terms of what I can paint. So they started to hear and so I started getting books. I just did Robin Hood, you know, so the 100th anniversary of Robin Hood, Scholastic, I did Robin because the last time it was done was N.C. Wyeth. So quite an honor. And, you know, more on that note on about who should do the work. I remember it's an age-old argument. Spike Lee and James Earl Jones were the first that I remember having this discussion. And Spike Lee of the mindset that you have to be of the culture to do the work properly. And then James Earl Jones was like, you don't care if you're purple, yellow, as long as you've done the homework, then you're worthy of doing the work. And I'm more of that mindset. But there's something to be said about there's something that goes in the work that is subconscious, automatic, okay? But it doesn't necessarily makes it better because I still need to do the homework, even though I'm African. For example, a little clip in the Porch People. When I went down to the Mississippi Delta, I could have been going to China because I didn't know that culture no more than I knew the Japanese or Chinese culture. The Mississippi Delta was, even though African Americans, I knew they lived the colloquiums, everything was just totally different. And I needed to go there and study that. So it still requires homework and study. You know. So I just wanted to bring that up. I remember also being in Princeton, it happened the first time. I'm sitting there in this amphitheater, and the place is packed. And question and answer, a little girl raises her hand, and she says, Mr. Lewis, I said, yes? How come you only paint black people? Like, ooh, wow. I said, okay, let me answer that. I'm going to answer that, and I'm going to ask a question of you. So the answer was, I do that, and I'm filling a void, as I mentioned. The void of not only African American, but Native American, Latino, across the board. You know, they are not being represented for a long time. They were not represented in books for a long time. So children of those different cultures want to see themselves, like you, in a book. And so I'm doing that, and I'm filling that. I'm privileged to be able to do that, fill that void. You understand? I said, now I have a question for you. I want to know if you would have asked that question if I were white. And the room got quiet. And she looked at me and didn't know how to answer it. Because it wouldn't have happened. It would have never happened. We would never ask a white author, why does he only paint white figures? So that's some of the things that we're dealing with and having to deal with. So Walter Anderson, The Secret World of Walter Anderson. This one was very interesting. This is an artist that lived, he actually went to the academy. I teach at two universities. I teach at the University of the Arts and I teach at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. Actually, I've just made history there because never in the history of the university, the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, have we ever taught illustration. So I'm the first to teach illustration. And so this guy, Walter Anderson, went there. And incredible artist. And if you read or look at his work, you'll say that it will start off by saying that this is probably the most famous artist, American artist that nobody knows. And his work works in watercolor. And so they came to me to do his work. So I had to go out to Mississippi, the Mississippi Delta, the Mississippi, Ocean Springs, Mississippi, not the Mississippi Delta, the Ocean Springs, Mississippi, to go and research this artist and met the family. They were very reluctant to have me come because I'm a Yankee, you know, coming out there. And basically, almost, I thought in the beginning, I probably was right, that I was there to exploit, you know, even though I didn't write it, but they were not comfortable having me do the work. And so I went out and convinced them that, you know, I think this is a good idea to have me do this work because I'm going to hopefully do good by your father. And so when I finished the book, I got letters from each one of the children. And they said, I don't know how you did it in a week's time, but you captured the essence of my father and my family. So they thank me. So I go out there now because now I'm good friends with them. But this artist, what he would do, he would go out in this little skiff here and row about 12, 14 hours over to Horn Island. He would get there and he would stay weeks on end on this island, uninhabited. And so I wanted to see what it felt like. So that's what I did. I went out, stayed on the island, so I can get the essence of what that felt like. And so the book came out, and it's a really, very powerful book, and it won all kinds of awards. Each Kindness, this one just came out, and Barry owns the cover. Smart man. This one is taking the world by surprise. This one is a story about a little girl who comes to a school for the very first time, and she's very poor. And I made her purposely a little white girl. And the little girl that teases her is a little biracial child. But all the kids tease her, but she is the worst. And so when she sits down, her name is Maya, she sits down next to little Chloe after being introduced to the class, and they all realize that she is just very dirt poor. And so she reaches out and says, and Chloe takes her books and stuff and pulls them over and looks out the window. And that's pretty much how it goes throughout most of the year. The other children, she comes in with jacks and jump ropes and all kinds of dolls, and they don't have anything to do with her. She plays by herself. And one day, she doesn't come into class. The teacher comes into the class with a bowl of water. She says, gather around. They all gather around, not knowing what's going to happen. She pulls up this little pebble. She says, you see this? This represents kindness. Watch what happens when I drop this little piece of kindness in this water. You see how it ripples out? That's what happens with kindness. No matter how big, how small, it ripples out and spreads. So she reaches in, grabs the pebble, and gives it to the student standing next to her. So Tommy, tell me what little kindness you perform. Oh, I helped my grandmother. And so on and so forth. And it came around to little Chloe. She gets the stone in her hand. She realizes that she has been the meanest to this little girl. And so she really can't answer the question. So the teacher edges her on, no matter how big, how small. Because she says to herself, when Maya comes back to school tomorrow, I'm going to show her some kindness. I'm going to become her best friend. Next day, Maya doesn't come back to school. So she's now dealing with this tomorrow. But Maya never comes back to school. That's how the story ends. Yeah. So, and it's told from the perspective of the bully, which is rare. But Jackie's the only one who could tell that story. And so it won the Coretta Scott again this year, and it won the major award. She won the major award for writing for this, and it was out only 4 months, and it already sold over 100,000 copies. And so it's already back now getting another 50,000 printed. So this is good choice, Barry. So I'm gonna leave you, this is Night Running. This one I'm gonna show you, I told you about the Kentucky book. This is a true story. These stories come down from the WPA back in the 1930s, where the government hired artists, authors, and things to go around to take photographs, what have you, but they also hired the authors to interview ex-slaves, to get their accounts. And so these now stories are in the Library of Congress. You can get them. And so this one is one of those stories. It's a true story. And the story starts with a little boy, a dog, and his boy, and a boy and his little dog named Zeus. His name is James. And so I went back out there to get the characters, and I'm dressing them up, going through costume design and what have you. And then here's the principal's wife and some of the kids there. Some of the townspeople, and little James getting ready to become the character. And there he is getting tied up. The principal of the school, he is going to help, and he's now being part of it. He's looking at the thumbnail sketches. And then those turn into the dummy book, where then translated into the photograph and then into the painting. In the story, the little boy tells his dog, Zeus, you can't come. I'm getting ready to run for my freedom, and your dog, you're going to bark and make all kinds of noises. He's going to let my whereabouts, that's not going to be good for me. So you can't come. But he runs off, and of course the dog runs with him, and they're running through the woods. And he gets, in order to get this shot, I had to climb into a tree. So I get up as high as I could, and I'm up there, and I fall out of the tree, and I come down, and I'm upside down, and I get the shot, but I wasn't going back up there again. And so it's blurry, so I wasn't going to go with it. I did well, and so it's blurry to running, And so he tells his best friend that I'm going to escape, and his best friend tells on him. And so he gets captured, so they're tying him up in a barn, and Zeus gets away, and he's there. That evening, he helps free his master. And they finally make their way down to the Ohio River, where he has to cross. On the other side is John Rankin's house. And I take this little creek, and I turn it into the Ohio River. So now he's waiting to go. He tells his dog, that's my freedom. You have to stay back. I have to go. He gets into the boat, gets out to the middle Ohio River, and his boat springs a leak, and he's out there drowning. So for $50, kids drown for me. $50 an hour, you know. And so he's out there drowning, and so we need this dog to come in to rescue him. And I'm sitting there on the bank. Now we're exhausted. Let's all get out. And so all this dog needs to do is make that leap. The dog would not jump into the water. I guess it wasn't in his contract. So he wouldn't jump. And so the master said, no, I know what to do. You're ready with your camera? Like, I am ready. I'm like telling you, I'm ready. Okay. I'm going to take food, and I'm going to toss it in, and he's going to jump in after it, because I'm sure he's hungry. Okay, sure. And the dog goes like this. Okay, that didn't work. He said, no, okay. I got a better idea. Okay, good. I'm going to get in the water, and I'm going to call him. And you have to be ready, because this is only going to happen one time. But he's going to come after me. I said, okay. I am there with my camera. I'm like, ready? Come on, boy, come on. The dog does this. So this is how we got him in. Not quite the image we were looking for, but we got him in. Now, there were no animals injured in the making of this book, so I had to use that disclaimer. And here he comes finally, and he's almost a goner. And here comes the dog. And he grabs into the Ohio side of the river, where he is rescued by the farmer, played by the principal of the school. And in the story, there's the painting. And in the story, the boy and the dog, they have to go to sleep because they have to rest. And I needed this dog to go to sleep, but this dog would not go to sleep. No matter what we did, he would not go to sleep. So we said, forget this. Through the magic of illustrating, I made him go to sleep. Yeah. My studio, well, this is not my studio now. I have a new studio, but this is what my studio looked like. It was a large warehouse, and the other part of it looked like this. My sons, Aaron and Josh, my two boys, one graduated from Temple, the other one from Maryland, and a week apart he graduated, and Noah, who's running around here. I gotta get a more recent picture of Noah, but that's Noah, who's running around here somewhere. And that's it. Thank you. Thank you.